Long before criminal profiling and forensic science became law enforcement's sharpest tools, there was a man who relied solely on logic, observation, and an unmatched intellect: Sherlock Holmes. By the turn of the 20th century, Holmes had become more than just a fictional detective. He was a cultural icon, and yet, his creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, remained conflicted. A trained physician and literary craftsman, Doyle had envisioned greater things: historical novels, philosophical reflections, but the world only wanted Holmes. After attempting to end the detective's career in The Final Problem, Doyle was met with outrage. But public pressure proved relentless, and in 1903, Holmes returned, to the thrill of fans across the globe. The Adventure of the Norwood Builder was among the early stories of this resurrection, a tale filled with suspicion, swift accusations, and a race against time. It begins with a young man named John Hector McFarlane, an aspiring lawyer, wrongfully accused of a brutal murder. The evidence against him is damning. The press has already convicted him. But Holmes sees what others miss. This is not merely a story of proving innocence. It's a deep dive into the psychology of guilt, deception, and appearances that deceive even the sharpest eyes. So, if you believe that the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, guided by reason, deduction, and the mind of Sherlock Holmes, then join us once again. This is the adventure of the Norwood Builder.
From the point of view of the criminal expert, London has become a singularly uninteresting city since the death of the late lamented Professor Moriarty.
I can hardly think that you would find many decent citizens to agree with you.
Well, I must not be selfish,
he said with a smile, pushing back his chair from the breakfast table.
The community is certainly the gainer, and no one the loser, save the poor out-of-work specialist, whose occupation is gone. With that man in the field, one's morning paper presented infinite possibilities. Often it was only the smallest trace, Watson, the faintest indication, and yet it was enough to tell me that the great malignant brain was there, like the gentlest tremors on the edge of a web that remind one of the foul spider lurking at its center. Petty thefts, wanton assaults, purposeless outrage, to the man who held the clue. All could be worked into one connected whole. To the scientific student of the higher criminal world, no capital in Europe offered the advantages which London then possessed. But now,
he shrugged his shoulders with a humorous expression, as if dismissing the state of affairs that he himself had helped to bring about. At the time I'm speaking of, Holmes had already returned for several months, and, at his request, I had sold my medical practice and moved back into our old quarters at Baker Street. A young doctor named Werner had purchased my small Kensington practice, and, to my surprise, had paid the highest price I dared to ask with hardly any hesitation, something that only made sense years later, when I discovered that Werner was a distant relative of Holmes, and that it was actually my friend who had provided the money. Our months of working together weren't as uneventful as Holmes had claimed. As I look back over my notes, I find that this period includes the case of the papers of ex-President Murillo, and also the shocking affair of the Dutch steamship Friesland, which had nearly cost us both our lives. Holmes's cold and proud nature always recoiled from public praise, and he bound me by the strictest terms not to say a single word about him, his methods, or his achievements, a restriction that, as I've explained, has only recently been lifted. Mr. Sherlock Holmes was leaning back in his chair after his whimsical complaint, unfolding his morning paper in a relaxed way, when our attention was suddenly drawn to a violent ring at the bell. It was immediately followed by a hollow pounding sound, as if someone was hammering on the outer door with his fist. As soon as it opened, there was a mad rush in the hallway. Rapid footsteps stormed up the stairs, and a moment later, a wild-eyed, frantic young man, pale, disheveled, and gasping for breath, burst into the room. He looked back and forth between us, and under our questioning gaze, seemed to realize that an apology was due for his sudden and dramatic entrance.
"I'm sorry, Mr. Holmes. You mustn't blame me. I'm nearly going mad. Mr. Holmes, I am the unhappy John Hector McFarlane."
He made the announcement as if his name alone would explain the reason for his visit and his state of panic. But from Holmes's unresponsive expression, I could tell that it meant as little to him as it did to me.
Have a cigarette, Mr. McFarlane,
said Holmes, pushing his case across.
I'm sure, with your symptoms, my friend Dr. Watson here would prescribe a sedative. The weather has been extremely warm these past few days. Now, if you feel a bit more composed, please sit down in that chair and tell us very slowly and calmly who you are and what it is you want. You mentioned your name as though I should recognize it, but I assure you, aside from the obvious facts that you're a bachelor, a solicitor, a Freemason, and an asthmatic, I know nothing about you.
Being familiar with my friend's methods, I had no trouble following his deductions, spotting the disheveled appearance, the bundle of legal papers, the Masonic watch charm, and the labored breathing that had informed his insights. But our client stared back in shock.
Yes, I am all that, Mr. Holmes. And more than that, I'm a most unfortunate man in London right now. For heaven's sake, don't abandon me, Mr. Holmes. If they come to arrest me before I finish my story, make them give me time so I could tell you the whole truth. I could go to jail with peace in my heart if I knew you were working on my behalf on the outside.
Arrest you? This is really most Grady, most interesting. On what charge do you expect to be arrested?
Upon the charge of murdering Mr. Jonas Oldacre of Lower Norwood.
My companion's expressive face showed sympathy, though I suspected it was not entirely free of satisfaction.
Dear me, it was only this morning at breakfast that I was telling my friend Dr. Watson how sensational cases have vanished from our newspapers.
Our visitor reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the Daily Telegraph, which was still resting on Holmes's knee.
If you had looked at it, sir, you would have seen immediately why I came to you this morning. It feels like my name and misfortune are on everyone's lips.
He turned the paper over and pointed to the center page.
Here it is, and with your permission, I'll read it to you. Listen to this, Mr. Holmes. The headlines say, Mysterious Affair at Lower Norwood. Disappearance of a well-known builder. Suspicion of murder and arson. A clue to the criminal. That's the clue they're already following, Mr. Holmes, and I know it's leading straight to me. I was followed from London Bridge Station, and I'm sure they're only waiting for the warrant to arrest me. It'll break my mother's heart. It'll break her heart.
He wrung his hands in torment, rocking back and forth in his chair. I looked closely at the man who now stood accused of committing a violent crime. He had fair hair and a handsome, though washed-out appearance, with wide, anxious blue eyes, a clean-shaven face, and a weak, sensitive mouth. He looked to be around 27 years old. His dress and manner were that of a gentleman. From the pocket of his light summer overcoat protruded a bundle of endorsed legal papers, identifying his profession.
We must use the time we have. Watson, would you be kind enough to take the paper and read the relevant paragraph?
Beneath the bold headlines our client had quoted, I read the following detailed report. Late last night, or early this morning, an incident occurred at Lower Norwood which points, it is feared, to a serious crime. Mr. Jonas Oldacre is a well-known resident of that suburb, where he has carried on his business as a builder for many years. Mr. Oldacre is a bachelor, 52 years of age, and lives in Deepdean House at the Sydenham end of the road of that name. He has had the reputation of being a man of eccentric habits, secretive and retiring. For some years, he has practically withdrawn from the business, in which he is said to have amassed considerable wealth. A small timber yard still exists, however, at the back of the house, and last night, about 12 o'clock, an alarm was given that one of the stacks was on fire. The engines were soon upon the spot, but the dry wood burned with great fury, and it was impossible to arrest the conflagration until the stack had been entirely consumed. Up to this point, the incident bore the appearance of an ordinary accident, but fresh indications seemed to point to serious crime. Surprise was expressed at the absence of the master of the establishment from the scene of the fire, and an inquiry followed, which showed that he had disappeared from the house. An examination of his room revealed that the bed had not been slept in, that a safe which stood in it was open, that a number of important papers were scattered about the room, and finally, that there were signs of a murderous struggle, slight traces of blood being found within the room, and an oaken walking stick, which also showed stains of blood upon the handle. It is known that Mr. Jonas Oldacre had received a late visitor in his bedroom upon that night, and the stick found has been identified as the property of this person, who is a young London solicitor named John Hector McFarlane, junior partner of Graham and McFarlane of 426 Gresham Buildings, EC. The police believe that they have evidence in their possession which supplies a very convincing motive for the crime, and altogether it cannot be doubted that sensational developments will follow. Later, it is rumored as we go to press that Mr. John Hector McFarlane has actually been arrested on the charge of the murder of Mr. Jonas Oldacre. It is at least certain that a warrant has been issued. There have been further and sinister developments in the investigation at Norwood. Besides the signs of struggle in the room of the unfortunate builder, it is now known that the French windows of his bedroom, which is on the ground floor, were found to be open, that there were marks as if some bulky object had been dragged across to the woodpile, and, finally, it is asserted that charred remains have been found among the charcoal ashes of the fire. The police theory is that a most sensational crime has been committed, that the victim was clubbed to death in his own bedroom, his papers rifled, and his dead body dragged across to the wood stack, which was then ignited so as to hide all traces of the crime. The conduct of the criminal investigation has been left in the experienced hands of Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, who is following up the clues with his accustomed energy and sagacity. Sherlock Holmes listened with his eyes closed and his fingertips pressed together as I read through the remarkable report.
The case does have some interesting features. May I ask you first, Mr. McFarlane, how it is that you are still at liberty, considering there seems to be enough evidence for your arrest?
I live at Torrington Lodge, Blackheath, with my parents, Mr. Holmes. But last night, since I had business late with Mr. Jonas Oldacre, I stayed at a hotel in Norwood and went to work from there. I knew nothing of this situation until I was on the train and read what you just heard. I instantly realized the terrifying danger I was in, and I rushed here to place the case in your hands. I've no doubt that I would have been arrested at either my office or my home. A man followed me from London Bridge Station, and I'm sure. Great heaven, what is that?
It was the loud clang of the bell, followed by the heavy footsteps on the stairs. A moment later, our old friend Lestrade appeared in the doorway. Over his shoulder, I glimpsed one or two uniformed policemen standing outside.
Mr. John Hector McFarlane?
Our unfortunate client stood up with a ghastly expression on his face.
I arrest you for the willful murder of Mr. Jonas Oldacre of Lower Norwood.
McFarlane turned toward us in despair and sank back into his chair, like a man completely crushed.
One moment, Lestrade. Half an hour more or less can't make much difference to you, and the gentleman was about to give us an account of this very interesting affair, which might help us in clearing it up.
I don't think there will be much difficulty in clearing it up.
All the same, with your permission, I'd be quite interested in hearing his account.
Well, Mr. Holmes, it's hard for me to refuse you anything, since you've helped the force a time or two, and Scotland Yard owes you a good turn. At the same time, I have to stay with my prisoner, and I'm obligated to warn him that anything he says can be used in evidence against him.
I wouldn't want any other way. All I ask is that you listen and recognize the truth for what it is.
Lestrade looked at his watch.
I'll give you half an hour.
First, I have to explain that I didn't know Mr. Jonas Oldacre personally. I'd heard his name because my parents used to know him years ago, but they lost touch. That's why I was so surprised when, yesterday around 3 in the afternoon, he walked into my office in the city. But I was even more shocked when he told me why he'd come. He had several sheets from a notebook with scribbled writing. Here they are, and he laid them on my table.
Here is my will. I want you, Mr. McFarlane, to turn it into proper legal form. I'll sit here while you do it.
I started copying it out, and you can imagine my amazement when I realized that, with some minor exceptions, he had left all his property to me. He was a peculiar little man, ferret-like, with white eyelashes, and as I looked up, I saw his sharp gray eyes watching me with an amused expression. I could hardly believe what I was reading. He explained that he was a bachelor with barely any living relatives, that he had known my parents in his youth, and that he had always heard good things about me, that I was a deserving young man and his money would be in trustworthy hands. Naturally, I could only stammer my thanks. The will was completed, signed, and witnessed by my clerk. This is the final document, on blue paper, and these other pages are the rough draft. Mr. Jonas Oldacre then told me that he had a number of important documents, building leases, title deeds, mortgages, stocks, and so on, that I needed to examine and understand. He said he wouldn't rest easy until everything was settled, and he urged me to come out to his house in Norwood that night, bringing the will with me. He told me,
Not a word to your parents until this is all arranged. We'll keep it as a little surprise for them.
He was very firm about that and made me promise. You can understand, Mr. Holmes, I wasn't in the mood to refuse him anything. He was my benefactor, and I just wanted to fulfill his wishes. So I sent a telegram home saying I had urgent business and couldn't say how late I'd be. Mr. Oldacre told me he might not be home until 9 and invited me to supper at that hour. I had a bit of trouble finding his house, so I didn't get there until nearly 9:30. I found him.
One moment. Who opened the door?
A middle-aged woman. I assumed she was his housekeeper.
And she's the one who asked your name.
Exactly.
Please go on.
McFarlane wiped the sweat from his brow and resumed.
The woman showed me into a sitting room where a simple supper was laid out. Afterwards, Mr. Jonas Oldacre led me into his bedroom where there was a heavy safe. He opened it and took out a bunch of documents, which we reviewed together. It was between 11 and 12 when we finished. He said we shouldn't disturb the housekeeper and showed me out through his own French window, which had been open the whole time.
Was the blind down?
I'm not certain, but I believe it was only halfway down. Yes, I remember he pulled it up to swing open the window. I couldn't find my stick, and he said,
Never mind, my boy. I hope to see a lot of you now, so I'll hold on to your stick until you come back to claim it.
I left him there, with the safe open and the papers stacked on the table. It was too late to return to Blackheath, so I spent the night at the Annerley Arms, and I knew nothing more until I read about this awful affair in the morning.
Anything more you'd like to ask, Mr. Holmes?
Not until I've been to Blackheath.
You mean to Norwood?
Oh yes, of course. That's what I must have meant.
Holmes said with one of his mysterious smiles. Lestrade, having learned through hard experience how Holmes's mind could penetrate what was a mystery to others, looked at him with curiosity.
I think I'd like a word with you in private, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Now, Mr. McFarlane, 2 constables are at the door, and there's a 4-wheeler waiting.
The miserable young man stood up and gave us one last pleading look before he left the room. The officers led him to the cab, but Lestrade stayed behind. Holmes had picked up the pages that made up the rough draft of the will and was examining them with great interest.
There are some points about this document, aren't there, Lestrade?
He passed the pages over. The inspector looked at them with a puzzled expression.
I can read the first few lines, and these in the middle of the second page, and 1 or 2 at the end. Those are clear as print. But the writing in between is very poor, and in 3 places, I can't read it at all.
What do you make of that?
Well, what do you make of it?
That it was written on a train. The neat writing represents station stops. The bad writing comes from the train moving. And the worst writing happened while crossing points. A handwriting expert would immediately say this was written on a suburban line. Only near a large city would there be such frequent points. Assuming the entire draft was written during the journey, the train must have been an express with just 1 stop between Norwood and London Bridge.
You're always 1 step ahead with your theories, Mr. Holmes. But how does this relate to the case?
Well, it supports the young man's story, that the will was drafted by Jonas Oldacre during his train journey yesterday. It's strange, isn't it, that someone would draft such an important document in such a careless way? It suggests that he didn't intend for it to have any real effect. If someone created a will they never meant to be valid, they might do it just like this.
Well, he signed his own death warrant at the same time.
Oh, you think so?
Don't you?
It's possible, but the case still isn't clear to me.
Not clear. If that's not clear, what could be clearer? A young man suddenly learns that if an older man dies, he inherits a fortune. What does he do? He tells no one. He arranges to visit that man that night on some pretext. He waits until the only other person in the house is asleep. Then, in the solitude of that man's room, he murders him, burns the body in the wood pile, and leaves for a nearby hotel. The blood stains in the room and on the stick are minor. Most likely, he thought his crime would leave little blood behind, and that the fire would erase all evidence that for some reason would have pointed to him. Isn't that obvious?
It strikes me, my good Lestrade, as being just a trifle too obvious. You do not add imagination to your other great qualities. But if you could for one moment put yourself in the place of this young man, would you choose the very night after the will had been made to commit your crime? Would it not seem dangerous to you to make so very close a relation between the two incidents? Again, would you choose an occasion when you are known to be in the house, when a servant has let you in? And finally, would you take the great pains to conceal the body, and yet leave your own stick as a sign that you were the criminal? Confess, Lestrade, that all this is very unlikely.
As to the stick, Mr. Holmes, you know as well as I do that a criminal is often flurried and does such things which a cool man would avoid. He was very likely afraid to go back to the room. Give me another theory that would fit the facts.
I could very easily give you half a dozen. Here, for example, is a very possible and even probable one. I make you a free present of it. The older man is showing documents which are of evident value. A passing tramp sees them through the window, the blind of which is only half down. Exit the solicitor. Enter the tramp. He seizes a stick, which he observes there, kills old Dacre, and departs after burning the body.
Why should the tramp burn the body?
For the matter of that, why should McFarlane?
To hide some evidence.
Possibly the tramp wanted to hide that any murder at all had been committed.
And why did the tramp take nothing?
Because they were papers that he could not negotiate.
Lestrade shook his head, though I noticed that his tone was not quite as confident as before.
Well, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, you may look for your tramp, and while you are finding him, we will hold on to our man. The future will show which is right. Just notice this point, Mr. Holmes, that so far as we know, none of the papers were removed, and that the prisoner is the one man in the world who had no reason for removing them, since he was heir at law, and would come into them in any case.
My friend seemed struck by this remark.
I don't mean to deny that the evidence is in some ways very strongly in favor of your theory. I only wish to point out that there are other theories possible. As you say, the future will decide. Good morning. I dare say that in the course of the day I shall drop in at Norwood and see how you are getting on.
Once the detective left, Holmes sprang to his feet and began preparing for the day with the energetic air of a man who had found a challenge that excited him.
My first movement, Watson, must, as I said, be in the direction of Blackheath.
And why not Norwood?
Because we have, in this case, one singular incident coming close to the heels of another singular incident. The police are making the mistake of concentrating their attention upon the second, because it happens to be the one which is actually criminal. But it is evident to me that the logical way to approach the case is to begin by trying to throw some light upon the first incident, the curious will, so suddenly made, and to so unexpected an heir. It may do something to simplify what followed. No, my dear fellow, I don't think you can help me. There's no prospect of danger, or I should not dream of stirring out without you. I trust that when I see you in the evening, I will be able to report that I have been able to do something for this unfortunate youngster, who has thrown himself upon my protection.
It was late when Holmes returned, and I could tell at once from the worried, worn look on his face that his efforts had not brought the result he had hoped for. For an hour, he played melancholic tunes on his violin, trying to calm his troubled mind. Finally, he put it down and launched into a detailed account of the day's failures.
It's all going wrong, Watson. All as wrong as it can go. I kept a bold face before Lestrade, but upon my soul, I believe that for once the fellow is on the right track, and we are on the wrong. All my instincts are one way, and all the facts are the other, and I much fear that British juries have not yet attained that pitch of intelligence when they will give the preference to my theories over Lestrade's facts.
Did you go to Blackheath?
Yes, Watson, I went there, and I found very quickly that the late lamented old Dacre was a pretty considerable blackguard. The father was away in search of his son. The mother was at home, a little fluffy, blue-eyed person, in a tremor of fear and indignation. Of course, she would not admit even the possibility of her son's guilt. but she showed no sorrow or surprise over Oldeker's death. In fact, her bitterness toward him only strengthened the police's case. If her son had heard her speak of the man in such a tone, it might easily have planted hatred and violence in his heart. She described Oldeker not as a man, but more like a vicious, cunning animal, an ape rather than a human being. She had known him when they were younger and explained that he had once been her suitor. She felt grateful she had rejected him and chosen a better, though poorer man. She revealed she had been engaged to Oldeker until she heard a horrifying story. He had once set a cat loose inside an aviary. So disgusted by his cruelty, she broke off the engagement. Then she opened a drawer and took out an old photograph, one of herself, violently slashed and mutilated with a knife. She explained that it was her own photo, and Oldeker had sent it back to her that way, with a vile curse, on the morning of her wedding. At one point, I suggested to her that perhaps Oldeker had forgiven her, seeing as he had left all his property to her son. But the woman responded with firm spirit, exclaiming that neither she nor her son wanted anything from Jonas Oldeker, whether dead or alive. She declared her faith that God in heaven had already punished the wicked man, and would in due time prove that her son was innocent of any crime. Well, I followed up one or two leads, but none of them supported our theory. In fact, several of them seemed to go directly against it. Eventually, I had to give it up and headed over to Norwood. Deep Dean House is a large, modern brick villa set well back on its own property, with a lawn full of thick laurel bushes in front. To the right, a little further back from the road, lies the timber yard where the fire took place. I sketched a rough plan in my notebook. That window on the left opens into Oldeker's room. You can see directly into it from the road. Honestly, that's about the only small bit of encouragement I got today. Lestrade wasn't around, but his chief constable showed me around. They'd just uncovered what they were calling a major find. They spent the morning digging through the ashes of the burned woodpile and discovered, along with some charred organic remains, several scorched metal discs. I examined them closely. There's no question they were trouser buttons. One of them even had the name Hyams stamped on it, Oldeker's tailor. Then I combed over the lawn, looking for any signs or traces. But the drought has hardened the ground like stone. There was nothing visible, except that it looked like a body, or maybe a bundle, had been dragged through a low privet hedge that lines up directly with the woodpile. All of that, of course, perfectly fits the official version of events. So I crawled around the lawn under the blazing August sun for an hour, and in the end, I came up no wiser than when I started. Well, after that complete letdown, I went into the bedroom and examined it as well. The bloodstains were minimal, just light smears and discoloration, but definitely fresh. The stick was gone by then, but even there, the markings were faint. There's no doubt the stick belonged to our client. He's already admitted as much. Footprints from both men were visible on the carpet, but there wasn't a single trace of a third person, which, again, plays straight into the official theory. They just kept stacking up their evidence while we were left standing still. There was one tiny glimmer of hope, but even that led nowhere. I checked the contents of the safe, most of which had been removed and laid out on the table. The papers were bundled into sealed envelopes, one or two of which had already been opened by the police. From what I could tell, none of them appeared to be particularly valuable, and his bank book didn't suggest that Mr. Oldeker was especially wealthy either. Still, I couldn't help but feel like something was missing. Some of the notes hinted at deeds, perhaps the most valuable ones, that I couldn't locate. If we could definitively prove they were gone, it would undermine Lestrade's whole argument. After all, why would someone steal something they were about to inherit? Having exhausted every other lead and come up empty, I decided to try my luck with the housekeeper. Her name is Mrs. Lexington, a small, dark, quiet woman with suspicious, sideways glances. I'm absolutely convinced she knows something, if only she'd talk. But she was sealed tight. She confirmed she had let Mr. McFarlane in at 9:30, and bitterly said she wished her hand had withered before doing so. She had gone to bed by 10:30. Her room was at the far end of the house, so she hadn't heard anything that happened afterward. According to her, McFarlane had left his hat, and likely his stick, in the hallway. She told me she'd been awakened by the alarm of fire. According to her, her poor, dear master had undoubtedly been murdered. When I asked whether he had any enemies, she replied vaguely that every man has them, but she insisted that old Dacre was a quiet, private man who kept mostly to himself and only dealt with people in a business capacity. She had seen the trouser buttons recovered from the ashes and was confident they came from the suit he'd been wearing the night before. The woodpile had been bone dry. It hadn't rained for a month, and it burned like tinder. By the time she reached the scene, there was nothing to see but flames. She and all the firemen clearly smelled burning flesh. As for the papers or any of Oldeker's private affairs, she claimed to know nothing. So, my dear Watson, that's my report, one of total failure. And yet,
Holmes clenched his thin hands with a sudden burst of conviction.
I know it's all wrong. I can feel it in my bones. Something hasn't come to light yet, and that housekeeper knows what it is. There was a kind of sulky defiance in her eyes, the kind that only shows up when someone's hiding something. But there's no point in talking more about it now. Unless we catch a lucky break, I'm afraid the Norwood disappearance case won't be making it into that chronicle of our successes that a patient public may one day have to endure.
Surely, the man's appearance would go far with any jury?
That is a dangerous argument, my dear Watson. Do you remember that terrible murderer, Bert Stevens, who wanted us to get him off in '87? Was there ever a more mild-mannered, Sunday school kind of young man?
It's true.
Unless we manage to establish an alternative theory, this man is lost. You can hardly find a flaw in the case that can be presented against him now, and all further investigation has only strengthened it. By the way, there's one curious little point about those papers that may serve as a starting point for our inquiry. While looking over the bank book, I discovered that the low balance was mainly due to large checks made out over the past year to a Mr. Cornelius. I must admit I'm curious to know who this Mr. Cornelius is, with whom a retired builder has been involved in such large transactions. Could he have had a hand in the affair? Cornelius might be a broker, but we haven't found any securities corresponding to those large payments. Since there are no other leads, I'll now have to direct my investigation toward the bank to learn more about the gentleman who cashed those checks. But I fear, my dear fellow, that this case might end ingloriously, with Lestrade hanging our client, and that, undoubtedly, would be a triumph for Scotland Yard.
I don't know how much sleep Sherlock Holmes got that night, but when I came down for breakfast, I found him pale and worn out. His bright eyes looked even brighter against the dark shadows beneath them. The carpet around his chair was littered with cigarette butts and early editions of the morning newspapers. An open telegram lay on the table.
What do you make of this, Watson?
He asked, tossing it over to me. It was from Norwood, and it read, "Important fresh evidence to hand. McFarlane's guilt definitely established. Advise you to abandon case. Lestrade." This sounds serious.
It's Lestrade's little cockadoodle of victory. And yet, it may be premature to abandon the case. After all, important fresh evidence is a two-edged thing. It may possibly cut in a very different direction from what Lestrade imagines. Have your breakfast, Watson, and let's go out together and see what we can do. I feel like I'll need your company and moral support today.
Holmes didn't touch any breakfast himself. It was one of his peculiar habits. During moments of intense concentration, he would refuse all food. I've known him to push his iron constitution so far that he once fainted purely from lack of nourishment. He used to explain,
At present, I cannot spare energy and nerve force for digestion.
whenever I protested as a doctor. So I wasn't surprised when he left his meal untouched that morning and started off with me for Norwood. A crowd of morbid onlookers was still gathered around Deep Dean House, which looked exactly like the kind of suburban villa I had imagined. Just inside the gates, we were met by Lestrade. His face was flushed with the pride of victory, and his manner was annoyingly triumphant.
Well, Mr. Holmes, have you proved us wrong yet? Have you found your tramp?
I formed no conclusion whatsoever.
But we formed ours yesterday, and now it proves correct. So you must admit we've gotten a bit ahead of you this time, Mr. Holmes.
You certainly have the air of something unusual having occurred.
You don't like being beaten any more than the rest of us do. A man can't always expect to have things his way, can he, Dr. Watson? Step this way, gentlemen. I think I can convince you once and for all that it was John McFarlane who committed this crime.
He led us down the hallway into a dark entrance hall.
This is where young McFarlane must have come out to grab his hat after committing the crime. Now, take a look at this.
With dramatic flair, he struck a match, and its flickering light revealed a stain on the whitewashed wall. As he brought the flame closer, I saw it was more than just a stain. It was a clear, well-defined thumbprint.
Examine that with your magnifying glass, Mr. Holmes.
Yes, I'm doing so.
You're aware, of course, that no two thumbprints are the same?
I've heard something along those lines.
Then kindly compare that print with this wax impression of young McFarlane's right thumb, taken on my orders this morning.
As he held the wax impression next to the blood mark, even without magnification, it was obvious the two prints matched exactly. It became painfully clear to me that our unfortunate client was doomed.
That's final.
Yes, that's final.
It is final.
But something in Holmes's tone made me look at him. His face had undergone a strange transformation. It was twitching with hidden amusement. His eyes sparkled like stars, and it seemed he was making a desperate effort to stifle a burst of laughter.
Dear me, now who would have thought it? How deceiving appearances can be. Such a nice young man to look at. It really teaches us not to trust our own judgment, doesn't it, Lestrade?
Yes, some of us are a little too confident, Mr. Holmes,
Said Lestrade. His arrogance was infuriating, but we had no grounds to object.
What a providential thing that this young man just happened to press his right thumb against the wall while taking his hat from the peg. Quite a natural action, if you think about it.
Holmes sounded outwardly calm, but I could see a tremor of excitement run through his body.
By the way, Lestrade, who made this remarkable discovery?
It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Lexington, who drew the night constable's attention to it.
And where was the night constable?
He stayed on guard in the bedroom where the crime occurred to make sure nothing was disturbed.
Then why didn't the police notice the mark yesterday?
Well, we had no particular reason to examine the hall carefully. Besides, as you can see, it's not exactly in a prominent spot.
No, of course not. I suppose there's no doubt the mark was there yesterday?
Lestrade looked at Holmes as if he thought he'd gone mad. Honestly, I was just as surprised by Holmes's sudden hilarity and that odd remark he'd made.
I don't know whether you think McFarlane broke out of jail in the middle of the night just to plant more evidence against himself. But I'll leave it to any expert in the world to decide whether that isn't the mark of his thumb.
It is unquestionably the mark of his thumb.
There, that's enough. I'm a practical man, Mr. Holmes, and once I have my evidence, I draw my conclusions. If you've got anything to say, you'll find me in the sitting room writing my report.
Holmes had now regained his composure, though I could still catch glimpses of amusement flickering across his face.
Dear me, Watson, this is quite a sad turn of events, isn't it? And yet, there are some odd details here that give me a bit of hope for our client.
I'm delighted to hear that. I was beginning to think there was no hope left.
I wouldn't go that far, my dear Watson. The truth is, there's a very serious flaw in the piece of evidence that our friend Lestrade is so proud of.
Really, Holmes? What is it?
Simply this. I know that Mark wasn't there when I examined the hall yesterday. Now then, Watson, how about we take a little stroll in the sunshine?
My mind was still muddled, but a bit of hope began to stir in my heart as I followed Holmes on a walk around the garden. He studied each face of the house with great interest. Then he led us inside and examined the entire building, from the basement to the attic. Most of the rooms were empty, but Holmes still gave each one a thorough inspection. Finally, on the top floor, in the corridor that ran outside 3 unoccupied bedrooms, Holmes suddenly burst into another fit of amusement.
There really are some very unique features about this case, Watson. I think it's time we brought our friend Lestrade into the loop. He's had his laugh at our expense. Perhaps now it's our turn, if my interpretation of this mystery turns out to be correct. Yes. I think I see how we should proceed.
Lestrade was still writing his report in the parlor when Holmes walked in to interrupt him.
I understand you're writing up a report on the case.
So I am.
Don't you think it might be a bit premature? I can't help but feel your evidence isn't quite complete yet.
Lestrade knew Holmes far too well to ignore a statement like that. He put down his pen and looked at Holmes intently.
What do you mean, Mr. Holmes?
Only that there's an important witness you haven't yet seen.
Can you produce him?
I believe I can.
Then do it.
I'll do my best. How many constables do you have available?
There are 3 within call.
Excellent. May I ask, are they all large, strong men with loud voices?
I've no doubt they are, though I can't imagine what their voices have to do with anything.
Perhaps I can help you see that, and maybe 1 or 2 other things as well. Kindly summon your men, and I'll give it a try.
5 minutes later, 3 policemen had assembled in the hall.
In the outhouse, you'll find a considerable amount of straw. I'd like you to bring in 2 bundles. I believe it will be very helpful in producing the witness I need. Thank you. Watson, I believe you have some matches in your pocket. Now, Mr. Lestrade, I'll ask all of you to accompany me to the top landing.
As I've mentioned before, there was a wide corridor at the top floor, running along 3 empty bedrooms. At one end of it, we all lined up under Holmes's direction. The constables grinning, and Lestrade staring at Holmes with a mix of amazement, curiosity, and disbelief. Holmes stood in front of us like a stage magician about to perform a trick.
Would you kindly send one of your constables to fetch 2 buckets of water? Now place the straw on the floor here, clear of both walls. Excellent. I think we're ready.
Lestrade's face was beginning to turn red with frustration.
I don't know if you're playing games with us, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, but if you know something, surely you can say it without all this nonsense.
I assure you, my dear Lestrade, I have a very good reason for everything I'm doing. You might remember that you teased me a bit earlier today, when the sun was shining on your side of the hedge, so you can't begrudge me a little showmanship now. Watson, would you please open that window and light the edge of the straw?
I did as asked. A gust of wind carried a swirl of gray smoke down the corridor, and the dry straw crackled and flamed.
Now, let's see if we can find this witness for you, Lestrade. Gentlemen, would you all kindly shout fire? With me? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
At Holmes's signal, we all raised our voices together in a loud shout of fire.
Thank you. Once more, if you please.
Again, at Holmes's request, we all shouted in unison, fire.
Just one more time, gentlemen, all together now.
For the 3rd time, we all shouted together at the top of our voices, fire. The shout echoed through Norwood, and then something astonishing happened. A door suddenly flew open from what appeared to be a solid wall at the far end of the corridor, and a small, shriveled man bolted out like a rabbit darting from its hole.
Excellent. Watson, a bucket of water over the straw. Thank you. Lestrade, allow me to introduce your key missing witness, Mr. Jonas Oldacre.
The detective stared at the little man in blank disbelief. Oldacre squinted into the bright hallway, blinking at us and at the smoldering straw. His was a repulsive face, sly, spiteful, with pale gray, shifty eyes and white lashes.
What's this all about? What have you been doing all this time, huh?
Oldacre gave a nervous little laugh and shrank away from Lestrade's furious, red face.
I haven't done anything wrong.
No harm. You nearly got an innocent man hanged. If it weren't for Mr. Holmes here, I'm not sure you wouldn't have succeeded.
I swear, sir, it was just a practical joke.
Oh, a joke, was it? Well, you're not going to be the one laughing. I promise you that. Take him downstairs and keep him in the sitting room until I get there.
When they had taken Oldacre away, Lestrade turned to Holmes.
Mr. Holmes, I couldn't say this in front of constables, but in the presence of Dr. Watson, I don't mind admitting this is the most brilliant thing you've ever done. I still don't understand how you pulled it off. You saved an innocent man's life and prevented a massive scandal that would have destroyed my career.
Holmes smiled and clapped Lestrade on the shoulder.
Instead of being ruined, my good fellow, you'll find your reputation has actually been strengthened. Just make a few edits to the report you were writing. They'll see how difficult it is to fool Inspector Lestrade.
And you don't want your name mentioned?
Not at all. The work is its own reward. Perhaps one day I'll get credit when my loyal historian decides to pick up his pen again, right, Watson? Now then, let's take a look at where this rat's been hiding.
A lath-in plaster partition had been run across the passage 6 feet from the end, with a door cunningly concealed in it. It was lit within by slits under the eaves. A few articles of furniture and a supply of food and water were within, together with a number of books and papers. As we stepped outside, Holmes remarked thoughtfully,
"That's the benefit of being a builder. He could set up his little hiding place all by himself, except, of course, with a little help from his precious housekeeper, whom I'd suggest you add to your list, Lestrade."
I'll take your advice. But how did you know about that space, Mr. Holmes?
I was convinced he was hiding somewhere inside the house when I walked down the upstairs corridor and found it 6 feet shorter than the one directly below. It was pretty clear where he must be. I figured he wouldn't have the nerve to sit tight through a fire alarm. Sure, we could have gone in and pulled him out, but I thought it would be more amusing to let him give himself away. Besides, I owed you a bit of a puzzle, Lestrade, after your little jabs this morning.
Well, you certainly got even with me there. But tell me, how did you know he was still inside the house to begin with?
The thumb mark, Lestrade. You said it was final, and so it was, but in quite a different way. I knew that Mark wasn't there the day before. As you may have noticed, I pay close attention to detail. I had examined that wall myself, and I was certain it was clean, so the mark had to be added during the night.
But how?
Quite easily. When those document packets were sealed, Jonas Oldacre got McFarlane to press his thumb into one of the soft wax seals. It would have happened so quickly and naturally that I doubt the young man even remembers doing it. Probably even Oldacre himself didn't realize how he'd use it at the time. But as he sat brooding in that hideout of his, the idea must have struck him that he could fabricate damning evidence with McFarlane's own thumbprint. All he had to do was take an impression from a wax seal, moisten it with a bit of blood, maybe from a pinprick, and press it against the wall during the night. He could have done it himself, or used the help of his housekeeper. If you go through the documents he carried into that hideaway, I'd wager you'll find the very seal with the thumbprint on it.
Wonderful. Just brilliant. It all makes perfect sense the way you explain it. But what was the purpose of this elaborate scheme, Mr. Holmes?
It amused me to see how quickly Lestrade's usual pompous tone had shifted. He now sounded like a schoolboy posing questions to his teacher.
Well, that's not so difficult to figure out. The man downstairs is deeply malicious and vindictive. Did you know that McFarlane's mother once rejected his proposal? You didn't. I told you. You should have gone to Blackheath before Norwood. That old wound festered in his bitter, scheming mind for years. He's longed for revenge his whole life, but never had the opportunity. Until now. Recently, things started going south for him, probably due to some shady investments. He decided to cheat his creditors, and for that, he began writing large checks to a man named Mr. Cornelius, who I suspect is just Oldacre under an alias. I haven't traced the checks yet, but I'm sure they were deposited in some provincial bank, where he occasionally led a second life. His plan was to disappear, withdraw the money, and start over with a new identity.
Yeah, that sounds plausible enough.
He likely thought that by vanishing, he could not only escape pursuit but also exact cruel revenge on his former sweetheart, by making it look like her only son had murdered him. It was a wickedly clever plot, and he carried it out like a true master. The fake will, the secret visit that even the boy's own parents didn't know about, the blood, the stick, the animal remains, and the buttons in the woodpile. It was all brilliant. A few hours ago, even I thought there was no way out of the trap. But he lacked one key trait of a true artist, knowing when to stop. He tried to overdo it, tighten the noose around McFarlane's neck even further, and that's what ruined him. Come on, Lestrade. Let's head downstairs. I have just a couple more questions for him.
The vile man was sitting in his own parlor, flanked by a policeman on either side.
It was just a joke, sir. A practical joke. Nothing more. I only hid myself to see the effect of my disappearance. I never meant for poor Mr. McFarlane to be harmed. I swear.
That's for a jury to decide. Either way, you'll be charged with conspiracy, if not attempted murder.
And I suspect your creditors will soon be freezing the account of Mr. Cornelius.
The little man flinched at that and turned his hateful eyes toward Holmes.
I owe you a lot, Mr. Holmes. Perhaps someday I'll return the favor.
I imagine your time will be fully occupied for quite a few years. By the way, what exactly did you stuff in the woodpile along with your old trousers? A dead dog. Rabbits. You won't say. That's rather unkind of you. No matter, I suppose a couple of rabbits would explain both the blood and the burnt remains. If you ever write an account of this case, Watson, feel free to let rabbits do the trick.
And so concluded the curious case of the Norwood Builder, a tale of deception and disguise, of hatred buried deep beneath the surface. Jonas Oldacre, a man thought dead, was exposed as a master of manipulation. His twisted plan unraveled not by force, but by the brilliance of Sherlock Holmes. A young life was saved, a bitter vendetta extinguished, and once again, truth emerged from behind the veil of lies. But how long will peace linger in Baker Street? For in the dim corners of London, danger still stirs, and Holmes, silent, relentless, awaits the next knock at the door. Stay alert. The shadows have stories yet to tell. This was the adventure of the Norwood Builder, brought to you by Echoes of Stories. Until we meet again, dear listener, keep your mind sharp and never trust appearances.